Just 5 years ago, in April 2015, I was standing outside of the restaurant in the basement of the Tokyo Ginza station and was wondering what would it be like to eat there. That dream is even more remote now than it was back then. I wonder if I'm ever going to visit Tsukebashi Jiro, one of the most famous sushi restaurants in the world. Most people believe that the 2011 documentary Jiro Dreams of Sushi is about Jiro Ono and his craft. The legendary owner is 94 years old today, is unlikely to make any sushi, not for the guests anyway. But even 9 years ago, he was no longer creating. The restaurant was and still is run by his son. And I wonder how many of you who saw the film can recall the son's name. To me, the movie was about the predetermined path forced upon the first son of a craftsman. As David Gelb, the filmmaker behind the documentary, says himself, "He is a story about a person living in his father's shadow, while his father is in a relentless pursuit of perfection." We see some traces of this hereditary culture reflected in people's names. I cannot imagine how does it feel to be an accomplished human being, perhaps a father or even a grandfather, only to have junior appended to your name. The only thing that irritates my ear more is the misogynistic husband and wife title Mr. and Mrs., as in Mr. and Mrs. George. I'm full of it. Well, you might say, if you're not happy with your name, you can always change it, right? But wouldn't you lose a part of you, a part of yourself, when you do that? What about the objects? Wouldn't an object lose a part of its purpose if you rename it? So what is a good name? Is it an identity, a purpose, a destiny, a marketing plot? Or is it simply the case because I can? All these questions popped into my head when I first heard of Microsoft announcing at Inspire new names, DataFlex and DataFlex Pro, the descendants of Common Data Service, itself a descendant of XRM, born in late noughties as a foundation for CRM that later became Dynamics 365 Customer Engagement, that then gave birth to the model-driven Power Apps. Confused? We all are. In today's episode of CRM Audio, we're trying to blow away some of the fog by speculating of what's and whys of the latest rename saga, and if Microsoft is going to throw carrots or sticks at the owners of the DataFlex trademark. And by the way, Jiro-san's name is Yoshikazu Ono.
You're listening to CRM Audio, the Microsoft Business Applications and Power Platform podcast. I'm Joel Lindstrom here with my co-hosts Shawn Tabor and George Dubinsky. And today we're all about DataFlex. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Doing well.
Wrapping up for tonight. Yeah.
I love it that you're at the end of your day or at the beginning of your day, but so I'm fresh and ready to go. I don't know, so DataFlex. If you haven't, if you weren't paying attention last week to the Microsoft Inspire announcements, probably in my opinion, one of the bigger ones was the announcement of what's called DataFlex. And so, what DataFlex is DataFlex is a light version of Common Data Service that will be included with every Teams license, which means that people can build apps inside of Teams, Power Apps inside of Teams, without having to license CDS. They get it's a limited version, and I think it has a lot of impact. The other thing is CDS, Common Data Service, is being rebranded as DataFlex Pro. So we're going to have DataFlex and DataFlex Pro. What do you think, guys?
So the DataFlex Pro doesn't have anything else. It's still what we know as CDS.
Right. Now, I think, again,
it's just a rebranding.
It's a rebranding, but I would expect that the changes that come as part of DataFlex will become also available as part of DataFlex Pro.
In what manner? What do you mean?
Easier ways to deploy apps to Teams.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Other things in Teams that trickle down into it.
Okay.
What gets me completely confused is that Microsoft tends to overlap with their products and overlap significantly. Like we still have Yammer, right? Which is basically confusing as for a company who switched to Teams, and why would you even consider that? But this aside, just recently we had the announcements of Microsoft Lists, that kind of lightweight structure designed to keep track of things. My reading into that was that it was kind of SharePoint Lite. Right. Kind of SharePoint without seeing SharePoint. So now we have Microsoft To Do, Microsoft Lists, and now we have DataFlex, which basically designed as a lightweight storage. So if I'm a citizen developer, that's confusing as it could ever be. Right. So obviously, as a developer myself, I'd love people to start using DataFlex because that's kind of that will give me a common language with the citizen developers. Right. I can talk about tables and fields and entities, whatever the names are going to be. It doesn't really matter. But I can talk about relationships between records and things like that, which is great. But if I'm a citizen developer, then it's extremely confusing to have all these multiple things that seemingly solve the same problem. So what do you think, guys?
Well, isn't that always been the case? You've always had Microsoft SQL Server and Microsoft Access. You've always had kinds of database. You had
but in a way, it kind of feels like they found. It feels like Microsoft found multiple selling opportunities and then just created things to sell them too, right? So they have like different classifications for licensing. So okay, let's fill that spot with a product, even if it does the same thing as something else.
Right. Well, I mean, as far as SharePoint lists, and I'm not a SharePoint person, but I've worked with a bunch of SharePoint stuff. And I mean, for SharePoint back in the day was kind of becoming its own application platform with SharePoint forms. You need some place to put that data, which is where the list comes from. But the way people are using them as backends for Power Apps, they don't have to be in SharePoint. So, and actually, I mean, SharePoint lists or Microsoft lists can have relationships. You can have lookup fields on one list to another list. So it does. But I think here's where I think the perspective is. This is driven by Teams. Teams is the shining star of Microsoft's products right now in the age of COVID. There are now over 75 million active daily users of Teams, which dwarfs any of these other platforms by magnitudes, Power Apps, Dynamics, probably even SharePoint. So with that in mind, this is viewed as a key differentiator for Teams because let's face it, when it comes to communication and it comes to collaboration on group chats, there's not that much difference between a Slack or a Teams. But the ability to build business apps and put them inside of Teams is a key differentiator. And go back 3, 4 podcast episodes before this was even announced at all. We did an episode about the value of Power Apps and Teams. And what I still maintain is if you aren't in a mobile scenario and you have an organization that has 1,000 people using Teams or 500 people using Teams every day, the least friction way for them to adopt your app is to put it inside of Teams because it doesn't feel like I'm going somewhere else and doing something else. But this is also a play because I have a hunch that of the users of Power Apps, and there's a bunch of them, there's like 3 million plus now, there's probably 80% of them are using Office licenses or maybe a little bit more. So there's got to be some play to be able to get them to grow and scale beyond the free licenses. And so SharePoint lists are creating technical debt that you basically have to start over and rebuild your whole app. where the vision here is DataFlex is limiting, it's not cannibalizing common data service because it's limited to just that team. There's less options to integrate to it. There's much lighter security, but there's a path where I can say, okay, I want to take this and I want to upgrade it to CDS Pro because I need to use this. I rolled something out from my site. Now I've got the 10 other sites in my company that need this, and we need to share data. So that to me is a really logical thing. But I don't think you can't like get rid of SharePoint Lists because the value they serve is, where else for people just starting needing to build a simple app for 3-4 people, you can put it Excel. That's terrible because the Excel spreadsheet locks and only one person can use it. So I think lists do have their place, but this now takes the default cost argument out of the equation if you're using Teams, and they will work on mobile as well. So again, I'm not going to default to lists for something just because it's the free option. Now I got another free option, but I may still use lists if they're a better fit. I need to use it outside of Teams. It's a simple, 1 to 3 tables, that sort of thing. There's nothing wrong with lists. You just don't want to use them for things that should be a more complex relational database.
Do we know anything about the kind of scaling up story? My concern would be is that once you start developing those apps inside the team, every single app will have their own contact database. Let's simplify it, right? So let's talk about contacts. Mm-hmm. So each one of them will have their own contact table or maybe contact. I'm not even sure if Common Data Model is going to make it. So perhaps they will have contacts from, contacts from Common Data Model. Like definition will be the same. Let's say for simplicity's sake, it could be the same. But you end up with effectively 5 apps would have 5 different contacts, and they all mean different things to different people. Now IT steps in and say, hey, look, we really need to start consolidating kind of all this data, all these contacts. We need to have visibility, what's being recorded, say, for GDPR purposes. How are we going to bring it all together? Because those contacts, they mean different things in all those 5 apps. How are we going to, create a single source, the master contact database or table? That's the upscale. The path up is really, really challenging, I'd say. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one thing is, from what I saw last week, you're not going to have all the system entities in there. So you're not going to, again, I don't know if you'll have a contact entity or not, but you're not going to have the common data model entities. May have a few, but not many of them. So I don't think you'll have a technical constraint that, we've got this same entity in 5 different databases. But you might
that's even worse. If you have the same entity with the different schema, that's even worse.
I agree with that.
But again, think of it. I think you're right. There is complexity. If you're assuming there's 5 different groups using it. Assume though that there's one group that starts using it, gets successful, and wants to scale that app to 5 other locations. Then you don't have the issue. But it's no different there than if you have 3 different sites start with their own common data service. You got to do some rationalization to see what you keep and what you throw away. One of them is always cleaner than the other one, so I usually say that one wins, and these other ones, import the data.
Well, I suppose, but keep in mind that the upgrade will be important because free licenses don't put bread on the table, and Microsoft
we
very
assume
much.
We're CRM people, so we assume everything's a customer database. I see a lot of things in the Power Users Forum that people are building that have nothing to do with customer data. They have to do inspection.
Look, whatever the set of templates is going to be there, that's what it's going to look like. I always said that every single Microsoft Access database looks like a wine collection or CD collection because those were 2 prominent templates. Right. Mm-hmm. So whatever templates you put in there, that's what you end up with.
And I think DataFlex. I'm sorry, Shawn, I interrupted you. That was rude of me. You go ahead.
With Joel,
you switch your tab.
No, George, you know as well as I do. If you don't just charge ahead, you're never going to get when Joel starts talking. Charles Lamanna said on on Twitter that DataFlex to DataFlex Pro is a licensing option, like Power BI Pro, and not actually a different thing. So, based on the restrictions of the licensing, API calls, things like that, are really the big difference from what it looks like from the official Word. So,
no, I'm sure that there will be no, say, complex constructs like role-based access security. You won't have plugins and things like that.
Right. There's no API calls at all. But that's a licensing thing. You can block that because of licensing.
And that's
the underlying structure is exactly the same.
And that's what tells me that the changes that they're building, because it's not just the database, they're also building the app making experience, a simplified version of it, into Teams. So people that are building DataFlex apps will work within Teams and make and do their apps. And so there's going to be some new controls coming for that. So that's what I'm thinking. Besides it just being a branding change for CDS to DataFlex Pro, we're probably also going to get those, because if you can upgrade a Teams app into a full app, I've got to think that those controls would also be available to be used inside of a CDS or DataFlex Pro app too. So that's where I think there will be benefits, especially if you're building from within Teams.
You have to say Microsoft for DataFlex, or else it's not.
Was it you, Joel, who suggested that Teams are going to become to Windows what Windows were to DOS?
No, that was Nick Dolman, and my response was, that basically I can see that, but I can also see a risk of this becoming the next Outlook, because we all remember the Outlook client and how everybody started putting all these apps in it, made it a Swiss Army.
Hey, look, if Zoom released a hardware device for Zoom calls, right? I'm sure it's just a matter of time before Teams Book is coming at the Microsoft store near you. Hold on, I'm taking that back. Microsoft's closed all their stores, so to the virtual Microsoft store near you.
So I think we need to talk about the name, because that was the one thing that got maybe a little bit more attention, was not what DataFlex is, but the fact there's already a product called DataFlex that's a low-code app development platform. If you Google what is DataFlex, the first thing you find is this, either the Wikipedia page or the website for the other DataFlex. And I've already, I've been, when I Google something, I started saying, or Bing or whatever, I've been searching for like DataFlex API limits, and you find a DataFlex API limit article for the other DataFlex. It's really kind of confusing.
I tell you one thing: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Juka Niren with his post DataFlex made it to position number 8 if you search to DataFlex for DataFlex, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. His blog article really is fantastic. It's been, I think, to me, it was the best article I saw on the entire thing.
Well, he got linked to or quoted by Mary Jo Foley, so that helps too.
Yeah. Well, no. I'm talking about the content.
Nothing against his content. Yeah. That is awesome.
So anyway, that aside, all the other DataFlex references point to a rapid application development environment, which doesn't make Microsoft case any easier. If it was like DataFlex, prostate treatment, that would be a different story from DataFlex rapid application development environment. So you can't argue it's a different domain.
But the other DataFlex, I was looking at it, it's like a rapid application development platform that's deployed, I think, on premise using IaaS.
Are you really going to argue this case on premise versus cloud? It's like, look, I'm pretty sure that doing a search, a Google and Bing search is number one or second item on the checklist for lawyers. So I'm pretty sure that Microsoft has a plan to deal with that. To begin with, DataFlex has an F capital. Microsoft DataFlex has an F in lowercase. So here we go.
Microsoft before it.
and Microsoft before that.
Maybe
so
they.
I'd leave it to
other
Wise.
products called DataFlex too. So maybe there's the argument that it's not an exclusive word for that product or for that other product too.
I would be very surprised if Microsoft's backpedal on this one. It's.
I hope not. Anyway,
I would be fun though. It would be fun.
I'm
Yes,
sure
it would be fun.
We need the podcast CDS audio though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably good we didn't do that.
So I guess we're DataFlex audio now. That's a lesson.
DataFlex Pro. No, DataFlex Pro audio.
Aspiring
Maybe
MVPs,
DataFlex
don't
Pro
name your blog or YouTube channel or podcast with a Microsoft product name in it because it will change, and then you'll look.
Oh my goodness!
Like the old guys.
If you search DataFlex on Bing, the first hit is VideoJet DataFlex printer. The second hit is news about DataFlex, and again, Yuka's diagram is kind of prominently featured as an image, and then it's all Microsoft. And Data Access DataFlex -63 is like number 4 entry on the list. So what is Microsoft DataFlex is kind of prominent news on Bing.
And don't forget DataFlex-INT, which sells monitor arms.
Okay, so okay, let's get off that. Let's move on and ask why the name change. Instead of CDS Lite, they went for DataFlex and DataFlex Pro. Any takers?
I'm sure they did focus group studies and said, "What do you think of this name?"
Well, and Lite, especially LITE, makes it sound like a lesser, even though it sounds cheap to me. So they probably didn't go that route.
Right.
Okay, like you can play with adjectives all you want, but why move away from CDS, which is only just now started to find some footing, and basically they kick the stand out and just basically leave it hanging, literally.
What do you think, George?
What do I think? I think as close CDS is to my heart as developer, I personally always found CDS and CDM differences a little bit confusing. So I always had to explain to people what the difference is. And it's very difficult to explain if someone doesn't have background in kind of informal disciplines in software design or doesn't have hard to explain to someone who comes from non-scientific background, like to a customer who works in unrelated industry. It's very difficult to explain difference between CDS and CDM. One is concept, another one API set, and then you start talking about API, which is foreign concept. So it is like common data service. It's a good developer's concept, but it's awful concept for the customers.
Yeah, I think
people still call it CRM, right?
I've heard Microsoft people like TSPs, fast track people, other people mix the terms up and say common data model instead of common data service, and especially people who aren't from a Dynamics background. If you have like a TSP that's from an Azure background, they usually say CDM instead of CDS because they don't really understand it. Add to that common data service isn't exactly moving boulders right now with the community. If you go on the community forum, and I'm saying this is the guy who's currently in the #1 spot for the common data service channel on
do you have a music? Hold on. Do you have a music to insert here? Like, like number one guy.
The questions about CDS are always the ones that nobody answers because the people who are in the Power Apps community generally do SharePoint lists. And so with that in mind, I think that not that CDS had some baggage, but it just wasn't it wasn't probably getting where they want, and now they got a new version that is going to blow out the adoption. You'll have people get used to the concepts and working with it, and giving it a fresh name to make it feel like a fresh start. I mean, that's the other thing we commonly see them relaunch something. Like when they brought out the SLAs for the unified interface, they announced it as if it was this brand new thing, even though we all know we could do it for a long time. But you want some fresh buzz around it, probably. So it's my thought. Shawn, what do you think?
I'm honestly, I'm not exactly sure why. I think it got a lot of good marketing. I think it got some excitement in what it means. So maybe that's why. But I'm really not clear on why at this point. I need to see how it's going to evolve before I can really understand why at this point.
So Shawn takes a hold and wait strategy.
That is what I'm doing. Yes.
Well, you won't have to wait long. We should be able to get our hands on it in August. So hopefully then we'll have our questions answered and people can start playing with it. But if I'm a maker of Power Apps and I'm building something and the only option I have right now is Lists because of my licensing, I'm going to tell people hold off for a little bit. Get your hands on DataFlex because a relational database for a larger, more complex app has a ton of benefits, and so it's a good thing.
Agreed.
We'll see, but there's a better name for it. I think.
I think so too.
Access. That will happen so much better.
Access Online. There you go. We named it.
All right, Access Pro. Let's call it SQL.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening to CRM Audio.